things, when you're working with people that you don't know how you meet them, and people say to you, how did you end up working or meeting that person? George Martin was one of those said people. Now, George Martin was an absolute genius record producer, no two ways about it. But my meeting with him was really by fluke, because I was working for a big radio station at the time. And he was one of the directors, I believe, or the radio station also owned George Martin's recording studio, some connection like that. And they had this huge canteen that everybody went in. And one day I'd finished, doing the broadcasting, and we're sitting in there having a cup of tea. And I see this guy sitting on his own, literally just in a corner. And I thought, I'm sure that's George Martin. So I went over, introduced myself, and that started a spectacular conversation and friendship. And I wanted to touch on that because I'm a huge music fan. I think everybody is secretly. We all love our pop music, whether it's classical, which is popular music of an era, through to operas, anything. I adore music. And meeting the people who create it is magnificent to me, because I just sort of look at them and think, how did you do that? How did you come up with it? George Martin really didn't disappoint, but one of the things that I did find strange was that he told me that Sir Paul McCartney, when he heard Matt Monro's version of Yesterday, wasn't that keen. He said over the years he grew to like it and respect the style in the arrangement more. But he said that, when he'd obviously, you've got to remember Paul McCartney's still a young buck when he's written Yesterday. And so when he heard Matt's version, which was very much more Sinatra-esque, he thought, this is not really what I had in mind. But of course, Yesterday is one of the most played songs in the world, and no doubt generates a huge amount of money for Sir Paul every year. But back to George. One of the things he told me, what he really enjoyed was his comedy records. He did so many, tracks with Bruce Forsyth, Charlie Drake, Peter Sellers, the Goons. And one of the reasons how he ended up working with Matt Monro, I don't know if people know this, is simply because they needed somebody to impersonate Frank Sinatra. And originally they were going to test out Dennis Lotus. Now, Dennis Lotus was a big, big star in the late 50s. And good-looking guy, to me, always reminded me of our version of Johnny Ray, but better, But they were going to try him. But then somebody suggested Matt Monro. Matt, of course, beautiful singer, could sing anything. And so he got the job on the Swinging for Sellers. And it was based on, songs for swinging lovers. But Sir George told me that Matt really didn't want to do these sort of comedy records. He wanted to do, his own music, of course, which he then went on to do to great success, once again, with Sir George Martin. George also told me that his work along the Bond themes, the Bond music, was great for him because, of course, we all know he produced that brilliant Bond theme, Goldfinger, for Dame Shirley Bassey. And, really, you only have to hear the opening bars and it's just brilliant, isn't it? But then he also got involved with Live and Let Die with Sir Roger Moore and, of course, Sir Paul McCartney, again, years after the Beatles. And it's interesting, because around that time, I believe, they were also looking to revamp certain things. And Sir Paul McCartney couldn't quite believe he'd been asked to write a Bond theme because they love Bonds like everybody else. But George Martin himself, was just a very clever guy. He did a lot of movies, that people forget about as well. One of them did star Mickey Rooney. And Mickey Rooney told me, gosh, doesn't that sound like a name drop? But Mickey Rooney told me that he basically only signed on to the movie once he knew Sir George would be supplying the music for the movie. That's just how powerful a record producer can be. Sir George did also tip on the fact that one of his most enjoyable experiences was recording a track that we all know but not necessarily want to admit to, and it might not be seen as totally PC today, but remember when Peter Sellers had a huge hit with Goodness Gracious Me with a very gorgeous, still, Sophia Loren. Sir George told me that when Sophia came to have the meeting and do the track, he couldn't quite take his eyes off her, and he couldn't quite believe he was in the presence of such beauty. He said for him that was one of the hardest recording sessions that he'd ever had to undertake. I have to say, I hope you don't mind me sharing these stories, but when you see these people, you do kind of think, wow, I was lucky to be there to meet them at that particular point. And, you look back at somebody like George Martin, he was such a nice man, so down to earth. And as say, we became, good friends, over the years after meeting at that point. And I was forever indebted by the fact that I was able to spend some time in the presence of the very brilliant George Martin, record producer.